A question that we receive all the time at Yellow Tree is, are my boilers regulated under the air quality legislation in South Africa? Do I have to license my boilers? And if so, what are the annual reporting requirements? Today, we're going to set about answering that question. And at the end of this video, you will have an understanding of whether your boilers are unregulated or regulated as controlled emitters or listed activities. In addition, you'll know whether the rating is based on a cumulative rating for all the boilers at your site or individually per boiler. My name is Sean, and I'm an engineer at Yellow Tree Environmental. We absolutely love the work that we do, and I'm very excited about today's video. First, we're going to start by looking at boilers between 0 and 10 megawatts in size. A 10 megawatt boiler is equivalent to a boiler that can produce 14 tons per hour of steam from and at 100 degrees centigrade. Now, in the South African context, these boilers we could call very small boilers, and they are unregulated. Boilers that are between 10 megawatts and 50 megawatts in size, or about 70 tons per hour of steam generating capacity from and at 100 degrees centigrade, the legislation calls small boilers or controlled emitters. And then boilers that are larger than 50 megawatts are called listed activities and are the most heavily regulated. Let's start by looking at the regulations pertaining to each of these three categories. For very small boilers, we see that there is no national licensing system or method of record keeping of the whereabouts and serial numbers of all of these boilers. There is also no reporting required on the NAEIS system. NAEIS stands for National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory System. There's possibly greenhouse gas reporting requirements for these small boilers, and I'll get to that in a moment because that legislation really is an anomaly. There are no emissions measurements required, and there are possible municipal bylaws. And an example of this is the eThekwini municipality that has regulated smaller boilers, and you can read all about this on our website. Now let's discuss boilers that are known as small boilers or controlled emitters in the South African legislation. As I've mentioned, these are boilers between 10 megawatts and 50 megawatts in size. There are no national licensing requirements for these boilers. However, we are noticing that some of the municipalities are imposing licensing requirements. Different from the very small boilers or controlled emitters are required to report on the NAEIS system annually before the 31st of March, and also they are required to report their greenhouse gas emissions on the SAGES system before the 31st of March every year. SAGES stands for the South African Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting System. Lastly, small boilers or controlled emitters, as they are known, are required to undergo annual emissions sampling, which is where Yellow Tree can help. Lastly, we have large boilers. These are categorized as listed activities, and as such, they require an atmospheric emissions license, which Yellow Tree can help you obtain, which is required to be renewed every 5 years. In addition, these large boilers are required to be reported upon the NAEIS system, as well as to undergo greenhouse gas reporting, annual emissions measurements, and in some cases, continuous emissions monitoring is required as well. One of the questions that we receive all the time is, are my boilers regulated per boiler, or are they cumulatively measured based on the megawatts of the whole site or installation? Let's go to the legislation to find out the answer to that question. Let's start firstly with small boilers. Here we have the declaration of a small boiler as a controlled emitter, and we'll see that a small boiler is described as any boiler with a design capacity equal to 10 megawatts but less than 50 megawatts heat input per unit. In other words, your boilers are controlled emitters if they are between 10 and 50 megawatts per boiler. If all of the boilers on your site are between 10 and 50 megawatts each, but cumulatively they add up to much more than 50 megawatts, it doesn't matter. They are still controlled emitters. Here we have the listed activities legislation, and we'll read subcategory 1.1 that pertains to solid fuel-fired boilers larger than 50 megawatts. We read here, all installations with design capacity equal to or greater than 50 megawatts heat input per unit. Now, the word installations can be misleading, but the interpretation that we've seen applied time and time again in industry is that the boilers are regulated based on the size of each boiler at a site, irrespective of the total cumulative rating of all of the boilers at that site. Now, finally, you might be wondering if the greenhouse gas regulations also pertain to each boiler or collectively, and the answer is different than you'd expect. As you might have noticed, in my slides, I said that there is possible greenhouse gas reporting if cumulatively all of the boilers at a specific site amount to more than 10 megawatts. In the greenhouse gas legislation, we see that there is a 10 megawatt threshold applying to many industries. Firstly, many of the industries in South Africa are regulated under Category 1A2, but even if your specific industry is not regulated over here, 1A, 5A is a sort of catch-all where stationary combustion is dealt with and there is a limit of 10 megawatts imposed. Of course, the question begs, 10 megawatts per boiler or 10 megawatts accumulatively? And that question is answered for us in footnote 1 here at the bottom. It says this threshold refers to a combined boiler design. And it goes on to say that if you have 6 boilers that are each 2 megawatts in size, then because you have 12 megawatts of capacity cumulatively at your site, which is greater than the threshold of 10 megawatts, then you are required to do greenhouse gas reporting and to file carbon tax. That brings us to an end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you still have questions, please contact us via our website, yellowtree.co.za. And please remember to share this video with somebody else in the boiler industry or in your organization for whom you feel it will be of benefit.